By early afternoon, the sky above Pompeii has already turned the wrong color, and inside a house near the Forum, a family is arguing about something that sounds almost mundane, which is whether to stay or whether to go, because the stones falling outside are getting heavier, and the street is filling with white pumice the way a stairwell fills with snow. And nobody in that house has ever seen anything like this before, so they are making the decision the only way they can, which is by guessing. Some of their neighbors have already left through the gates, carrying coins and jewelry and whatever else they could grab in the last few minutes, and others have gone the opposite direction, back indoors, under stairwells and tables, because thick Roman walls feel safer than an open street full of falling rock, and for a while, both of those choices will look like the right one. That is the part of this story that keeps getting flattened into a single image. The idea that Vesuvius simply erupted and Pompeii simply died all at once, without warning, frozen mid-sentence like the plaster casts everyone recognizes. But the layers in the ground tell a slower story than that. And so does the evidence of who was found where and what they were carrying, and how many of them were never found at all. So the real question isn't just what destroyed Pompeii, because that part has never really been in doubt. The real question is why some people got out and others didn't, and at what exact point getting out stopped being possible, and whether if you'd been standing in that house near the Forum, you would have known which choice to make. By the time the deadliest part of the eruption arrived, most of the decisions that would kill people had already been made. To understand why anyone stayed, you have to understand what Pompeii already knew about disaster, because this wasn't a city meeting danger for the first time. Roughly 17 years earlier, a major earthquake had torn through the region, cracking walls, toppling statues, and damaging public buildings across the city, and in AD 79, a lot of that damage still hadn't been fixed. Scaffolding, half-finished walls and rooms under repair were part of the ordinary texture of daily life, which meant Pompeians had already learned an important lesson, one that would turn out to be dangerously incomplete, that the ground shakes, buildings crack, and life continues. Smaller tremors were common enough that most people probably didn't think twice about them, and Vesuvius itself didn't look like the sharp, ominous cone people picture today. Its slopes were farmed and settled, covered in vineyards rather than treated as the flank of an active volcano, because as far as anyone in Pompeii knew, nothing like this had happened in living memory. There was no seismology, no volcanology, no concept of a pyroclastic current, and no official evacuation plan, which means every decision made over the next day would be made without the one thing modern disaster response depends on most: accurate information about what's actually coming. So when the mountain finally broke open, the people below it weren't ignoring an obvious threat. They were interpreting an unprecedented one, using only the tools they had, which were memory, instinct, and whatever they could see with their own eyes. In the early hours of the eruption, Vesuvius sends a column of gas, ash, and pulverized rock rising violently into the sky, climbing so high and so fast that Pliny the Younger, watching from across the bay at Misenum, will later describe it as looking like a pine tree, a tall trunk spreading out into branches at the top, which happens to be a remarkably accurate description of what volcanologists now call a Plinian eruption column. It's worth pausing on that, because Pliny is one of the only surviving eyewitnesses to any of this, and while he never actually names Pompeii and was never inside the city himself, his account of earthquakes, darkness at midday, falling ash and people arguing over whether to shelter or flee lines up closely with what the geology underneath Pompeii now confirms. Wind carries the plumes southeast, directly over Pompeii, and white pumice begins falling from the sky. Light and porous at first, more like hail than rock. People step outside to look. Some are curious, some are frightened, and almost nobody yet understands that this is the opening stage of a disaster that will last through the rest of the day and into the following morning. As the fall continues and intensifies, the decisions begin. Some residents start moving toward the gates, gathering coins, keys, and small valuables on the way out. The same instinct anyone today would recognize from any evacuation: grab what matters and go. Others move the opposite direction, into houses and lower rooms, judging correctly that falling stone is dangerous, but incorrectly that a roof will hold indefinitely. At this stage, both choices are reasonable, and both choices are, for now, survivable. But reasonable choices don't stay reasonable forever, and that's where this story stops being about volcanology and starts being about time. As the afternoon wears on, the pumice deepens in the streets, first inches, then over a meter, eventually reaching close to 3 meters in places according to the official Pompeii archaeological project, and walking through it becomes exhausting, then genuinely dangerous. Roof tiles crack under the accumulating weight. Earthquakes continue rattling walls already weakened by the earlier disaster years before. Visibility drops as ash thickens in the air, and daylight begins fading into an artificial dusk hours before it should, forcing people indoors to light lamps in the middle of the afternoon. For someone healthy, moving quickly and traveling light, escape is still realistic during this window, but for a family with young children, elderly relatives, or people they're responsible for, every additional hour makes the streets slower and the shelter option more tempting. And this is precisely where the class and dependency of Roman life start to matter. Pompeii was full of enslaved people, servants and laborers who could not simply decide for themselves when to leave, where to go, or what to bring, which means the question, why didn't they just leave, carries an assumption of freedom that a significant part of the population never had. By nightfall, the city is in a kind of suspended crisis. Streets are choked with debris, buildings are failing under repeated structural stress, and people are sheltering wherever they can. Under staircases, beneath tables, inside the strongest rooms they can find, still believing, not unreasonably, that they're waiting out the worst of it. Then, at some point during the night, the fall appears to weaken. This is the moment that should worry you most, because it's the moment several plausible reconstructions suggest may have drawn people back outside, thinking the eruption had peaked and the danger had passed. Survivors who had been sheltering start to emerge. Streets that were empty begin to move again. It looks, for a short window, like the worst is over. It isn't. Deep beneath the surface, the eruption column becomes unstable, and portions of it begin to collapse under their own weight. An event that elsewhere in the region has already produced fast-moving clouds of superheated gas and ash sweeping downhill with no advance warning at all. Herculaneum, much closer to the volcano, has already been overwhelmed by earlier currents of exactly this kind. Pompeii's turn is coming, and this time there will be no gradual build-up to react to. What happens next has a name, a pyroclastic density current, but the name doesn't really convey what it does, so it's worth being precise about it rather than dramatic. Somewhere around dawn on the second day, a wall of superheated gas, ash and debris moves down the slope of Vesuvius and across the surrounding landscape at speeds no person could outrun, entering Pompeii's streets and buildings within moments and leaving almost no usable reaction time for anyone still inside the affected area. It doesn't just fill the streets, it enters homes through windows and doorways. So being indoors, the choice that had protected so many people through the previous night, stops being any protection at all. For a long time, popular accounts assumed everyone caught in this final stage died slowly, suffocating gradually in ash the way you might drown in dust. Modern multidisciplinary research paints a harsher but faster picture, one where extreme heat, not gradual suffocation, was probably the dominant cause of death for many of the victims caught in this current, meaning death for a significant number of people arrived in moments rather than minutes. The precise mechanism likely varied from person to person, shaped by their exact location, the density of the ash cloud around them, and whatever shelter, if any, they had, which is why the responsible conclusion isn't that everyone died the same way, but that almost nobody caught in the open or even indoors within the current's path had any meaningful chance. And this is where the investigation takes its sharpest turn. Because for nearly 2 centuries, the people who died in Pompeii have been given identities they may never have actually had. Since the 19th century, excavators have poured plaster into the cavities left behind by decomposed bodies inside the hardened ash, producing the famous casts that visitors and documentaries alike have treated almost like photographs of the final moment. A woman curled protectively around a child became the mother. Two figures found close together became the embracing sisters. These labels felt obvious, human, almost impossible to question. Then came the DNA. Genetic analysis of skeletal material preserved inside several of these casts has quietly dismantled some of Pompeii's most famous stories. The figure long presented as a mother, cradling a child in her final moments, was genetically male. The child beside him was not his biological child at all. Individuals assumed for generations to be sisters or mother and daughter could not be confirmed as related in that way, and several of the analyzed victims showed genetic ancestry connected to the Eastern Mediterranean rather than the assumed local Roman population. None of this means the poses weren't real or that the deaths weren't tragic. They clearly were. What it means is that archaeologists recovered the shapes people left behind, but it was later generations who supplied the names, the relationships, and the emotional narratives layered on top of them, and for 200 years, almost nobody thought to check. Once you accept that Pompeii's death toll wasn't instant, and that its most famous identities aren't as certain as they look, a few genuinely competing interpretations start to emerge among the researchers who study this material closely. The leading one is straightforward but easy to miss if you've only encountered Pompeii through the casts, that most of the population probably escaped. Population estimates for the city vary, and large sections remain unexcavated, so nobody can put an exact percentage on it. But the number of identified victims is far below what you'd expect if the entire city had been caught in place, and that gap is best explained by evacuation, not by undiscovered bodies alone. Empty houses stripped of valuables, abandoned objects left behind in a hurry rather than kept, and victims found near gates rather than scattered evenly throughout the city, all point the same direction. The image of an entire population frozen mid-life, the one Pompeii is most famous for, is the exception in the archaeological record, not the rule. The second serious debate concerns exactly how people died, and it matters more than it might seem, because it changes how you should picture those final moments. For decades, the dominant image was slow suffocation in ash, a lingering, almost gentle death compared to what the science now suggests, which is that extreme heat killed many victims in the final current almost instantly. That's not a comforting revision, but it is probably a more accurate one. And then there's the date. For centuries, 24th August was treated as settled fact, largely because of surviving manuscript copies of Pliny's letters. But archaeological evidence, autumn produce, heavier winter clothing on some victims, seasonal wine-making equipment, and a charcoal inscription apparently dated to the 17th of October, found in a room mid-renovation and unlikely to have survived long before the eruption, has pushed many researchers toward a later date in the year. It isn't fully settled. A study reported in 2024 argued the traditional August date might still be defensible. But the fact that historians can't agree on the month Pompeii died is a useful reminder of how much of this investigation still rests on inference rather than certainty. So could you have escaped? In the first few hours, almost certainly yes, and thousands of people appear to have done exactly that, moving south and away from the mountain while the pumice was still shallow enough to walk through. But every hour after that made the decision harder to get right. Staying indoors protected you from falling stone until the moment your roof gave way under its weight. Leaving exposed you to earthquakes, darkness, and streets that were quite literally disappearing beneath the ground until the moment those streets became the only way out. The people who never left Pompeii were not, for the most part, careless or unaware. They were choosing between two options that had both looked survivable only hours before, using nothing but memory, instinct, and whatever they could see with their own eyes, in a city that had never faced anything like this and had no way of knowing which choice would still be safe by morning. Somewhere in Pompeii, in a room that has since been excavated and catalogued, there is a house with the table still set, and no one ever came home to clear it. For more forgotten cases, famous mysteries, and dark history, consider subscribing. Until next time.